Alright guys, welcome to the channel. Alright, so let's get into this. I've been waiting for the Mig-29 for a long time, and I was pretty excited when the update dropped the other day and it hit the live server. My experience with this jet as an average pilot has been interesting to say the least. So no more wasting time, let's jump into the review, and then I'll give you my opinion on whether you should grind this jet. So I tried playing this jet multiple ways. I went high, which generally isn't a good idea because F-14s and F-16 ADFs own the BVR space. The APG-66 and AUG-9 radars are amazing, and they send you defensive before your slot-back or N019 radar ever gets a lock. Alright, so that wasn't working out so well, so I tried going low, but low wasn't much better. The F-14s and F-16s and the occasional MiG-29 are also low, and you usually get met with a wall of AIM-7Fs or 7Ms just like at high altitude. So kind of didn't work out that way either. So let's jump into some specifics. Okay, so let's talk firepower, principally the R27R and the T first. So I played around with both the R27R and the R27T. Using the R was a little frustrating because of the radar of the MiG-29, which I'll cover later. Overall, the missile performed adequately, but it doesn't have the range of the 7F or the 7M Sparrow. I mean, I knew that already, that's not surprising. It also seems to bite off on chaff often. Most of my kills with the R27R were on enemies being engaged by multiple aircraft. In a one-on-one duel, the R27R will lose most times against Sparrow-equipped F-4EJ Kais, the F-14, and of course the F-16 air defense fighters. Using the R27T was equally disappointing because I had high hopes for this missile. The T is very susceptible to flares now, despite it having ECCM, or I think it should be called IRCM, infrared countermeasures. But at any rate, the R27T is very susceptible to flares. Like I was saying, it will go for them all the time. My hit rate was very low using the T because of the near constant pre-flaring. Inside of 10 kilometers is the best range for the R27T, but probably around 8 kilometers is the sweet spot. In a head-on engagement, you really have no advantages if you're carrying an all-infrared loadout, you know, the R60Ms and the Ts, with the R27T being your big stick, because of the enemy pre-flaring. It's best to avoid the head-on situations if you're carrying infrared missiles, period. Overall, both the R27R and the R27T lack lethality in an environment with heavy countermeasures. The ECCM seems non-existent on the T and the R compared to the AIM-7Fs and the 7Ms. Your missiles are quite mediocre. Okay, so let's talk about the R60M. I'm not even going to bother talking about the R60, which is laughable at this tier. The R60Ms are tough to get kills with compared to the gold standard AIM-9L. The 9L is frankly an amazing missile, and the R60M has no hope of catching up to that. The R60M constantly goes for flares and makes the Mig-29 a struggle bus to play. If enemies are aware of you, you can kiss any chance of landing an R60M kill goodbye. The best strategy is to third-party enemies that are preoccupied. Next is the 30mm gun. The gun does alright work, no disappointments there, and it's good because your missile arsenal is going to let you down. Okay, so let's talk about the radar and the infrared search and track. So the N019 slot back for the NATO reporting name. This radar set a year ago would have been pretty good, but even with its different modes like track while search and the search pulse Doppler and the head-on modes for both of those, it fails to match the BVR mastery of the APG-66 or the AUG-9. The main problem is that the MiG-29 will almost always fail to sort into groups and lock factor threats before you get locked. The Phoenix spam is omnipresent, and it's probably already on the way because who doesn't like being an enemy whiz on your own runway? So the Phoenix is on the way, and the AIM-7F or M will shortly follow. This all happens before you even properly lock and get a missile off. And even if you get a missile off, the R27Rs, you have to trash it and go defensive to survive. So this is not a new challenge for the Fulcrum. The Fulcrum has always had a problem getting close because its R27Rs don't have the range and the radar is inferior. Alright, so a good Mig-29 pilot already knew that. You know the strengths and weaknesses of your machine, so the slot-back radar has limited scan angles and limited range, but the strength of the Fulcrum had always been that if you managed to get to the merge, if you managed to get within visual range and you got into that arena, then with your agility, the helmet-mounted sight, and the R-73 Archer, you'd be able to own that. That was your advantage. Now I know why Gaijin removed the R-73 Archer. They said there was some technical issues, and the plane on the dev server looked really strong. I mean, it looked really overpowered. But on the live server, the Fulcrum seems to have been robbed of its best weapons, and now it's looking pretty underwhelming. The Mig-29 basically has no advantages now, and because of that, you don't have any impact on early game play. So let's talk about the infrared search and track. So this system, it fails to make any significant impact. I was hoping that the Erst coupled with the R27T would allow passive kills, you know, that you'd be able to own that space. I gave up on this tactic early because the Erst has limited range, and with the constant pre-flaring, it makes the infrared search and track and R27T combo pretty useless to use. And part of that is you're not really able to stay undetected. That would be the strength of the infrared search and track with the R27T, basically stealth kills. But because you get spotted by either an enemy radar or you just get spotted visually, by the time that you're able to get within range, like I said, about 8 kilometers is a good range to use the R27T, you're already spotted, the enemy's already flaring, surprise is lost, so this tactic is, like I said, nearly worthless. Okay, so let's focus on the helmet-mounted sight. So the R60M, even with its 30G overload, cannot take advantage of the helmet-mounted sight on the Mig-29. It's better than nothing, but in my experience, it doesn't matter as much as people thought it would. I would trade it away for better infrared missiles that didn't eat flares like a fat kid at a cake buffet. Alright, so let's talk about performance, and I think this is where the Mig-29 shines a bit. For the most part, the raw performance of the Fulcrum from its 2 RD-33 engines feels really good. I mean, it feels really awesome. The jet is so fast, and I love that. Older jets like the Phantom, they have no chance in a 1v1 with the Fulcrum. But the high agility that I thought that the Fulcrum's supposed to have seems to be missing here. In other sims where I've flown this jet, like DCS for example, the handling is night and day. You have to manhandle the Fulcrum around in War Thunder and just make it do what you want it to do. I don't mind that so much, just, you know, yanking it around, but it feels like more of a hammer than a scalpel. Getting rid of the external fuel tanks and taking less fuel alleviates that, but I don't recommend it because the Fulcrum is quite hungry for gas, and because the external fuel tank gets depleted quite quickly anyway, you might as well just take it. So what is my assessment overall? Overall, I think Gaijin cut too deep with the Mig-29. It may be unpopular for some to hear, but that's the way I feel about it. They removed the R-73 and, you know, they gave the reasons why, and we accepted it then. So they removed the R-73 and they nerfed the R-27T on top of that. The Fulcrum has never been a BVR god. And of course, I'm primarily talking about the early iterations of the Fulcrum, but it hasn't ever excelled in BVR because of its radar and the R-27R shortcomings, and its advantages mostly laid in the ability to own the merge with its helmet-mounted sight and the R-73 combo, if it ever came down to that. In a War Thunder, it always comes down to that because you almost always end up in a merge. Its passive acquisition combo of the infrared search and track and R-27T doesn't work well. It doesn't work well as I hoped. So your main strategy in the Fulcrum comes down to playing it safe early game and then becoming an opportunistic vulture in mid to late game. For better pilots, of course, you'll get better results with this plane, but for the average pilot, I feel you're going to struggle a bit. I didn't have as much fun in this plane as I thought I would. Compared to the F-14, which has been in the game for months, the Fulcrum is hardly a challenge to it. I mean, F-14 drivers are hardly breaking a sweat taking on the Fulcrum. Playing the Fulcrum to me seems like a chore. Out of the new planes, if I had to recommend which to grind first, I would solidly say go for the F-16 first. The Fulcrum is not a complete disappointment though, so it's still worth grinding because it probably is going to get better. But right now, it is very underwhelming to play. So how can it get better? Like I said, the Fulcrum is really let down by all of its tools. At the core jet is fine, but its systems and its missiles just don't work very well, or at least not as well as its Western counterparts, which is to be expected. The technology is behind a little bit compared to NATO and Western militaries. So if Gaijin doesn't reverse the nerfs, Fulcrum players may have to wait for the R27ER or the R27ET to balance things out in the BVR arena. And for within visual range, I don't think that re-adding the R73 is going to be a panacea. I think as long as you fly Fulcrum, you're going to have to work pretty hard for your kills. It's definitely not easy street with this plane, or it's not as easy to get kills as it is in some other aircraft. Alright guys, as always, these are my opinions. You know, I play all the tech trees, so please don't come at me with some Russian main kind of thing. It just isn't going to fly here. I hope that if you have some comments that they're constructive and we can talk about it. But if you like the video, just hit that like button for me. It really helps the algorithm out. And even if you don't like the video, still like the video. Alright guys, I'll try to get an F-16 video out before Christmas. And as always, I appreciate you stopping by and checking it out. And I'll see you in the future. Peace.